So welcome again. My name's Maddie Gregory. I am in a joint position at the Georgetown College and the Cawley Career Center to help liberal arts students kind of connect their career pathways to their academic roads. Also support lots of students, all of the students pretty much at Georgetown, which has been wonderful. But we're here in partnership with lots of folks today. Super excited to be working with CMEA, with the Humanities Initiative, with the Georgetown College Dean's Office, Hatchet Book Group, University Press. So lots of folks in the space today that are going to be speaking on topics of publishing and professional writing. So we're super excited. I'm going to turn the floor over really briefly to Nicoletta to talk a little bit just about the Humanities Roundtables, as this event was kind of had that little caveat in front of it, and it's something that we plan to do in the future to help connect students to career pathways that might be possible. So Nicoletta, take the floor.
Thank you very much, Maddie. Good evening, everybody. I wish to really thank Maddie for her wonderful organization and Deans Soika Colbert and Rowan Williamson for spearheading this event, and our distinguished panelists for agreeing to convene tonight to talk with you students about this multifaceted world of publishing and professional writing. As Maddie was saying, this event is a partnership, and it's an excellent example of the kind of partnerships that the Georgetown Humanities Initiative intends to facilitate. I'm delighted to be working with the Cawley Career Center, and we plan to offer many other roundtables on career options for students in the humanities and beyond, and also on other topics that can really help us highlight connections between the academic and the professional world. We're also open to suggestions. So if you students have any idea, please let us know. If you're not familiar with the Georgetown Humanities, I can tell you that it's an initiative that aims to be a kind of umbrella of all that is going on campus in the humanities, promoting interdisciplinary collaborations across departments for research, pedagogy, or also public-facing projects. We want to demonstrate the enduring value of the humanities for the understanding of the human condition. And in line with the integrative mission of our university, we support both traditional humanistic scholarship and digital work, or initiatives for the wider community, arts and performances. The purpose is really to engage with the critical issues of our time: racial and social justice, climate and the environment, migration, to name just a few, but always with the methodology of the humanities. You know, the humanities offer creative and critical tools to tackle complex problems. They tell stories, and through these stories, we want to show the constructive power of diversity to bring us together, to promote ethical decision-making. In all this, we want to involve students as much as possible. And so we really want you to be ambassadors, not just spectators. We want to offer you research and collaborative opportunities for and with you. We even have a student advisory board. And so if you're interested, please get in touch with me. I'll be glad to share my email in the chat. So I stop here, and I wish all of you a very productive panel. Thank you.
Our moderator for the event today is Dr. Colbert, who's our interim dean of the college, professor, wearer of many hats. So Soika, I'll turn this over to you here now.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation. I just want to start off by saying, before I introduce our illustrious panel, that this conversation is really to give students a chance to hear about the career and world of publishing and writing as an option for you. And so we do have a moderated conversation that I plan to have with the panelists, but please feel free, students, to drop your questions in the chat, and I will try to integrate them into the conversation. We're also reserving time at the end for your questions as well. But as we're talking, if a question comes up, please feel free to drop it in the chat or to raise your hand, and I'm happy to call on you. You can ask your question yourself. So our panelists are Clive Priddle, publisher of Hatchet Book Group and Public Affairs Book. Clive Priddle joined Public Affairs as executive editor in 2003. He became editorial director in 2006 and publisher in 2012. Since joining public affairs, the authors he has edited include Abid Benji and Esther Duflo, Linda Robinson, Nathan Sharnsky, Kensho Muhabani, John Kerry, David Rothkick, Richard Haas, and Muhammad Yunus. Prior to that, he was publishing director of Fourth Estate, a division of HarperCollins, and previously worked for 4 years at Penguin UK. Erica Suter, journalist and author, is a parenting expert on Good Morning America and other national network shows. She writes for moms.com, Cafe Mom, and additional sites that reach millions of moms monthly. It's her job to speak to parents across the country and to stay on top of the issues, controversies, and trends most affecting families today. Her work has also appeared in Self, Cosmopolitan, Essence, HuffPost, and WebMD, and she has been on staff at US Weekly and People. Her first book, How to Have a Kid and Save a Life, a Survival Guide, comes out in August, and I know we are all eagerly anticipating the release of her new book. Elizabeth Velez is writer and Georgetown professor. Her bio doesn't say this, but many Georgetown alum have told me she's the best writing instructor they've ever had. Elizabeth Velez is the academic director of the Community Scholars Program and a professional lecturer in the Women and Gender Studies program. She teaches feminist theory for women's studies. A writer and journalist, she has covered feminist issues for national publications for the past 10 years. Professor Velez's most recent book, The Hell with Love, a feminist anthology of poetry, was published in January 2002. She is currently working on Kiss Off, Poems to Set You Free, an annotated radical feminist anthology of poetry. Molly Chahek is the managing director of Candles and instructor in the Community Scholars Program. As the managing director for Candles, she manages and implements the strategic, organizational, and operational activities of the center, while also teaching in the Community Scholars Program. She brings to Candles extensive experience in educational technology, faculty and program development and evaluation, as well as change management. Prior to Georgetown, Molly has spent years in K-12 teaching and administration and worked at Time Warner as an assistant editor. Last but not least, Al Bertrand is the director of Georgetown University Press. As the manager of the press's operations, he acts as an acquisitions editor for books in religion and theology and for titles about Washington, D.C. and the region. Prior to joining Georgetown, Al worked for Princeton University Press as the press's editor-in-chief, leading editorial efforts and expanding international authorship, and also previously served as editorial director for John Wiley and Sons in Oxford. So please join me with a warm virtual welcome for our panelists. So I want to begin with a question, and perhaps the panelists can respond to it in the order in which I introduced them. So starting with Clive Priddle and then moving on to Erica Suter and so forth. Could you tell us what about how you became interested in publishing or professional writing? What drew you to this type of work as a student yourself? Can you tell us about your early career path?
Sure. Thank you for the question. Nice to be here. Hello, everybody. So I was an arts graduate, English literature, absolutely no idea what to do with that degree in terms of actually earning a living. And I got to book publishing by a kind of process of elimination. And that meant somehow local newspaper journalism didn't quite do it for me, or I didn't do it for the local newspapers that I interviewed with. Though there was one particularly dingy one on the banks of the Thames in London, in a chilly part of Kent, that offered me a job, but that seemed too miserable for words. And I couldn't quite work out how to do a sort of more corporate style of writing, where there were also opportunities and actually rather well-paid ones at the time. And I could have been employee number, 100 at Vodafone, in which case I'd be much richer than everybody by now. But I didn't do that. But I was a book reader. I liked the way books worked. I've thought a lot about books since, and I still like the way books work as a technology. I like the relationship that authors have with readers, and eventually I got a job at Penguin. It wasn't straightforward, but when Penguin offered me a job, they were the kind of company that I thought, well, I've heard of them. I like their books. I'm going to see a lot of them. Who could ask for a better way to kick off? And so that's what got me started.
Excellent. Erica?
Yeah, well, for me, I came to Georgetown University intent on being a lawyer, and that was my focus. I was a government major, but I also had a deep interest in English, and I loved reading, I loved writing, and I took a lot of English classes, and I met professors who really encouraged me to write more. In fact, Elizabeth Velez was one of my first English professors, and she really saw something in my writing that I didn't even see, and really encouraged me to pursue that. And so I got an internship at People magazine, and I just started exploring what it meant to be a writer and what that world was like. And I loved it. I fell in love with it. And I switched career paths. Instead of becoming a lawyer, I became a journalist. And it really was about listening to my professors and exploring something new, and just looking into the other skill sets I had and building on them, and just finding something that I love.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
So I have a very checkered career. I am very privileged and happy. I should say there were a few little things in the bio. I'm actually retired. I'm no longer the academic director of community scholars. I am, though, teaching part-time. And yeah, both Molly and Erica, I have these strong relationships, and I'm just going to say, the way I met Molly was she was my editor at what was then Warner Books for the first book that I published. And since the bio, I published 2 more books, all with Hachette, starting with Molly. So I feel like that the opportunity that I've had, like working with Erica, can I talk a little bit more about our history, Erica? So I was writing actually for People magazine while I was teaching. I was doing occasional pieces. I did a lot of sort of feminist pieces. I did a story that took 6 months on sexual assault at Gallaudet University. But we had a great bureau chief, and she was saying, you've got to have some brilliant young person who can intern at People. And she said, and they need to be at least a junior, especially really a senior. So Erica was a sophomore. That's right, isn't it? And we just, said, Erica, go talk to the bureau chief. So Erica started writing for People her sophomore year, which was pretty amazing. And turned that into a job at New York for People magazine for a while. And obviously, Erica is far better than People magazine and is now doing these other things. But I have a student, what I want to tell my students all the time, the work we're doing in class is not some made up academic 5-paragraph English thing. It's real writing, and it's writing in the world. And the best story I have about that is Community Scholars. There's a critical reading and writing seminar that is part of that students take their first year. Molly now teaches in that program. And so this was about 8 years ago. I had a young man who had gone through DC public schools. He was a good writer, but he hadn't thought about himself as a real writer. So he was writing these kind of academic essays. And the last assignment was to look at your education, this was community scholar class, and write a critique of it. And he had been educated in public schools in DC. And he wrote this just astonishing essay that was about what was wrong with his education in DC public schools, what was right with it. There was more wrong than right. So Daryl, when I got it, I said, I have this friend at the Post who writes about education, and I want to send this to her. And really what I was thinking is the education department of the Washington Post needs to read this. This is a student. They're always writing about education from these other standpoints. And they read it and they were like, no, this is brilliant. We're going to publish it. So they did a 3-page Sunday op-ed piece where Daryl's essay was published. And it was an amazing thing for him. And that's what I want. I have other students who've given me essays that have been published. So I see that as part of my work. You're writing for the world. It's not just this narrow little class. And I'll just add to Daryl's story. I said to him, so how much are they going to pay you? And he said, pay me. You know, why should they pay me? I'm going to get published in the Washington Post. And I was like, no, Daryl, they're going to have to pay you. You sold this to them. And so he said, are you all going to pay me? And they said, well, yeah, you're going to get $600. And it was pretty amazing for him to think, wait a minute, I did something for them. They didn't do something for me. So I'd rather stick to those stories. And Molly, you know, Molly was my first editor, went to New York, had lunch with Molly. It was an amazing experience. And she edited the first 2 or 3 books, I think, Molly. Yeah, so I think that we need to say to our students, you're writing for the world, no matter what you're writing about. So, yeah.
Thank you. And Molly, I don't know if you want to speak to your role as an editor or your current role, but you know, your early career path.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think what might be interesting to this audience is, you know, how I got into publishing, and I think what I can illustrate a little bit of what Elizabeth is calling attention to, which is the power of networking, how she worked with Erica, and you know, things came of that. Elizabeth and I worked together, and things happen, and so you just can't underestimate that power. And you have the power of social media at your hands, which wasn't quite as robust. Erica, you're obviously much younger than I am, but definitely we did not have social media at our hands. But I was in the Peace Corps. I had gone to NYU, and so I had been sort of keeping my eye on the publishing industry, and went to the Peace Corps, went back to New York, and just asked my friends if I could have informational interviews with their bosses. Anyone I knew who was working in publishing, I would call them. People love to do informational interviews. People love to talk about themselves, and people love to feel like they're helping young people. So just don't feel shy about ever asking for that. And that's how I ended up getting a job at what used to be Time Warner, was then broken up into pieces, and now has become part, at least the part that I worked for, I believe that became part of Hachette Book Group.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, and then, you know, interacting with Elizabeth reminded me of my love of teaching, which I had done in the Peace Corps, and I ended up leaving publishing and coming into teaching, where I became an administrator now, I want to say, for the past 18 years. And so I have done a ton of hiring in that capacity. And so I'm happy to talk to anybody offline about resumes or hiring strategy or interview strategies. That's a real passion of mine. And last but not least, I did talk to my colleague, Malati Chalavi, who I went to the MA program at Georgetown with, and she works at Macmillan, and she could not be here tonight, but she's also someone who would be happy to, again, be on the receiving end of a query on LinkedIn and talk to anybody in this room. So I think that's how I can be helpful, is sort of figuring out how to pull the threads that will lead you where you want to go.
So Al, maybe you could talk some about, you know, some of your early career, but also the difference between trade publishing and academic publishing as a career path.
Sure, thank you. It's nice to be here. My story has a lot of echoes with Clive's. I majored in history, didn't quite know what I wanted to do with my life, explored journalism, and then ended up in graduate school in history. And at that time, I had kind of 2 realizations about myself. One was that I wanted to explore ideas in a certain amount of depth, but maybe not the depth of a dissertation. So I started thinking about, you know, what's a place that I can stay in touch with ideas, with academics. That's very important to me, but not, you know, spend the next 3 or 4 years of my life working on, you know, the Hittite Bronze Age or something like that. And so that got me to thinking about academic publishing. I think as a graduate student, I had become more aware of different publishers and their lists. And the second realization I had about myself was that I felt what I was doing as a graduate student was very lonely. I mean, hopefully it's not like this at Georgetown doing a PhD or anymore, but it was sort of in the library by myself in the Carroll day after day. And I started to realize that I wanted to do something that was more of a team effort. And so I got very lucky. I got a job as a publishing assistant at Blackwell Publishing in Oxford. I had gotten married and moved to the UK in the meantime. And what I liked from the very, very beginning of my career in publishing was the kind of combination of what I was describing earlier about ideas and helping people realize their ambitions as authors and realize their ideas, but that publishing is also a business. It's a very practical activity. How many copies of this book should you print? What should you price it at? You know, how will you work with your author to create a kind of through line from the idea to reaching the audience? And I just kind of love that combination of business and ideas from the very beginning. So, I mean, scholarly publishing, you know, really is about, I guess has several parts, but one of the largest components really is about publishing academic research, helping get it out into the world. We also, like many other publishers, publish books that we would call kind of a scholarly trade book. So it's a book where you're taking academic knowledge, but trying to communicate that to a wider public. And then the third thing we do, which is common among university presses, is to publish books about the region in which we live and work. And so, as you mentioned, so you get an introduction, we publish books about Washington, D.C. and the region. And that's, you know, very common among academic publishers as well. So perhaps I'll stop there and hand back over to you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I also appreciate some of the threads that are already emerging in our conversation. My next question, which some of you have already answered in part, but I still want to see if there's other responses, is if there's any advice or experiences you think would be beneficial for college students if they want to begin a career in writing or publishing. And so we heard Elizabeth and Molly talking some about networking, and also, you know, making use of your writing classes, not just as an exercise, but writing for the real world, which I think is really important. Clive, I wonder if there are other things that you would suggest as you're evaluating young people applying for jobs or thinking about experiences maybe that you had that you would advise for our students today.
Yeah, so the first is that there's a lot of publishing pieces that are not writing. Publishing is a big industry. I got a kick out of working for Penguin in the UK very early on when I was working on a book which is a biography of Aung San Suu Kyi, the current deposed head of the government in Myanmar. And the book was written by her then husband, who was an academic at Oxford. And we published this book in Penguin, and I was the copy editor. I was doing little line edits on it. And I suddenly realized this book was going to be published simultaneously in Britain, Australia, America, Canada, and parts of Africa. It's like we were going to be on 4 continents. My little book, you know, I was doing my little line edits on, was going to be all over the world. And I thought that is exciting, but there's a huge architecture that makes that possible. So whilst I was, you know, full of, you know, how to use a semicolon at the time, the fact is there are salespeople, there are marketing people, there are people who sell different territories for the book. There are business people who help publishing, which is a strange and old-fashioned industry with a long history, make it vaguely functional in the 21st century. And I would urge people to think broadly about any of these areas and not be too purist if you're looking at publishing and thinking, I want to get in. Don't think you have to be an editor on day one. Pretty much any experience you bring is going to be valuable, even if you decide you want to be an editor on day 3. And I met actually a Georgetown student a few days ago who had been, you know, as a business student, was looking at finance in publishing. And that's a very rare combination. We don't see a lot of people coming out of a finance background looking at book publishing, but it's actually incredibly valuable. So, so I would say, you know, think broadly, certainly think about, think in a worldly way. The publishing that I'm involved in, as Al said, is a more commercially driven environment than academic presses. Academic presses have their own business marks that they have to hit, but they usually have other ways of funding them than purely the sale of books. Some do, some don't. For me, if I don't sell enough copies of the books that I commit the company's money to and time and so forth, then I'm out on the street, and that's the way it is. So we have to be a little bit hard-nosed that way.
Thank you. And, I'm glad that you raised the issue of, publishing as being an industry where there's lots of different roles that one could play. Erica, are there things that you would add in terms of good experiences that you had as a young writer, or experiences that you look for when you're hiring young people in the publishing industry or as writers?
I think there are two really important things that every young writer and old writer too, I suppose, could be helpful. Number one is that you have to understand the world beyond your bubble, right? So no matter what you're writing, you have to have an idea of how the world works, outside of your experience. And that's one of the really great things about being a journalist, is because every other day was a different story for me. So I was talking to people and learning about things that I wouldn't naturally have learned about if I was like had a regular office job or did something else. The other thing that I think is hugely important, and I find that a lot of young writers don't like, is they don't like criticism and they don't like guidance. And I think that is incredibly important. Your editors and your mentors are there to help you. And if you're rewritten, you learn from that. You look at what you did wrong and you make it better the next time. And so I think those two things are hugely important when you want to be successful as a writer, because very few of us start off as, Pulitzer Prize winning journalists or writing bestsellers. But what we do is we grow with we grow in our writing, and we become better over time. And that's because we have people also mentoring and nurturing those skills that we have. So those are two things I'd add.
Excellent, thank you. Elizabeth, you've already given us some great advice, but I wonder if there's anything else you would add.
I would sort of echo what Erica is saying. The students that I have who, are interested in writing, are serious, who might want to be writers, they ask for criticism. And I think it's really hard. I agree with you, Erica. It's as soon as you've written something that somebody says, wait a minute, you kind of want to explain. I hear students say, well, no, here's what I meant to say. And then you're sort of gently saying, right, but that's not what I heard. That's not what I read. And you did mean to say something, and our job is to figure that out together. And I think that's the kind of thing that Erica is talking about. I would also say, I would agree with Erica that if you're interested in journalism at all, it does take you incredibly out of your bubble. And I know, Erica, you and I both probably have some stories about being taken out of our bubble in People magazine. But you have this job to do, and you have to write about those people. And if you don't listen to them and understand them, then what you write isn't true. And it's a hard thing to do. I think just one little quick example. I don't know if you were there then, Erica, but I was sent out to what was essentially a terrorist camp. It was the guy who wrote the Turner Diaries, which was a white supremacist book that has inspired all kinds of awful, awful things in this country. And I had to be there. There were people with guns, there were Quonset huts. And my job was to listen to this man and somehow write a story that told the truth. And the truth was that he was really insane, that he was a white supremacist, that he was a racist. But at the same time, and I don't know, Erica, if you've had, situations that were as hard as that, but at the same time, you're there, you're kind of frightened. There are guns, you are disagreeing. So it's the listening part. And I guess I would say, even if you're not a journalist, any kind of writer has to listen, and has to listen to the world around her, because if you're writing fiction, if you're writing poetry, it doesn't matter, because that world is there and you can't be locked inside your own head or that bubble.
Wow, that really resonated with me at the end when you were talking about listening. Thank you for that. Thank you for all of your comments, but particularly at the end, that really resonated.
Well, people you don't want to listen to some of the time, for sure. And that's part of it, I think, but it's sometimes very difficult. You know, I did a sexual assault story for people where I listened to young men and then I listened to young women. And then you're supposed to be in a position where you can find out some kind of truth. It's very, very difficult. But yeah, I would say listening is huge.
Molly, did you want to add to this thread?
Well, I did. I'm listening to Erica's comment about writing and getting feedback on your writing. And it made me think of something that's so important in publishing, both as a writer and as an editor looking for people to publish. And I'm sure everyone here can speak to it, but it's making me think about building yourself a platform. And because that's, publishers really care about what kind of platform you have to promote and sell your book to the world. And so on the editor side, you can be scouring blogs and listening to podcasts and finding the next person who's going to have that kind of platform. By platform, I mean that kind of media contact or just that body of work that can then help you launch your book or the book that you're editing to a larger audience. And Eric, I'm thinking about, as you're talking about write and seek guidance on that writing and get feedback, it's all fodder, right? So you could be writing that all for a blog. You could be writing that for your capstone project. All of that can be used. You can, I work with an English MA student, Megan Medaffery, who did this brilliant podcast for her capstone. So I just wanted to say that everything you're doing can build and start to create that platform. And then if you're looking more on the editorial side, that's what you would want to be looking for to make your next discovery. So I'm sure Al and Clive and Erica can speak to that much more.
Yeah. So Al, I was just curious if there's anything that you would add, and particularly since you have interns at GU Press, when you're looking for experiences or selecting them, what type of activities do they engage in before they come to you?
Sure. So maybe I could say a little bit, 3 things about kind of what we're looking for, or I think might be helpful for students to emphasize when looking for a position. So the first is that, Clive was going through the various kind of aspects of publishing, publicity, marketing, production. All of those kind of entry-level jobs, including, as well as editorial assistant, are very demanding jobs. So one of the things we're looking for is someone who's well organized, who's efficient, who's a good communicator. So I think to emphasize kind of those skills and any experiences you have that, demonstrate that. So they could be, that you worked as an assistant in an office supply company or something like that. It doesn't have to be kind of arts or publishing based, because, we have organizations to run, and as I say, these are demanding jobs. So you want to give them to someone who's going to be able to run with them. The second is that I think one of the most important skills in publishing across all the different roles that I described is to be able to write persuasively. When you think about it, we spend an awful lot of our time like writing a memo to your manager about why we should do this book, writing publicity pitch to, a newspaper, writing marketing copy. It's a tremendous amount of kind of persuasive writing goes on in a publishing house. So I think, to emphasize that and to develop that skill is very important. And then the third thing I think is that when we have like an editorial assistant position open, or this was true at Princeton as well, you may get 100 or more applications. So you're trying to figure out ways to kind of prioritize. And I think one of the things, people look for is some kind of demonstrable interest in publishing, because lots of people, I think, are vaguely kind of interested in publishing as a career. But when you have lots of applications, you have to have some kind of way of, of making a decision. So I would just urge students to get some kind of work experience. And I realize that for many people, doing a 3-month internship or a summer internship may not be possible, but I often have students approach me who just want sort of small work experiences, sort of like, can I help you on this particular project? Can I help you for a week? And I think those kind of experiences, you learn a tremendous amount, and I think will also help get your foot in the door if that's what you want to do.
Thank you. And I just want to say to the students, some of whom might have joined us a few minutes after we began, that this event, again, is for you to ask any question you want about publishing or writing as a career. So please feel free to raise your hand or to type a question directly to me in the chat, and I'm happy to ask it. We also will reserve a few minutes at the end for you to ask questions, but please feel free to ask questions now if you would like. And so as I wait for the questions from the students to flow in, I have another one, which is if you could talk about what your day-to-day life is like. So both Al and Clive mentioned that there's so many different aspects of the publishing career that happen, but even I think sometimes we might have a misconception of what the life of a writer is like. So I wonder, Clive, if you could just talk some about what your day-to-day life is like. What does it mean to be an acquisitions editor and a publisher?
I'm happy to do that. I'm going to answer your last question as well, because I want to say there are a couple of things that I really like in the interns who I feel have worked out really well for us. And in fact, we have the youngest member of our team was formerly an intern. She was an intern before her final year in college. And we liked her so much that we happened to have a job that came open when she graduated, and we were very happy that she came to us. And I want to say that there are two kind of weirdly kind of opposite facing characteristics, which I really like if you can balance them out, and it's modesty and confidence. So we all have to be modest in publishing because we're working with very talented and very sensitive people, and we can't just sort of barrel through their books as though we know them better than the authors do. We can make a lot of mistakes if we do that. And so a certain amount of modesty is really important, but confidence is important too, because writers a lot of time need to hear confidence from us, certainly in other areas of the process. And being willing to step forward and say, I want to advocate for this project. I think this is important. I think we should do this. I think I know how to sell this. Ultimately, those two things, if you get the balance right, are tremendously good. And also confidence to be a team player. Publishing is, the way I like to think of publishing, it's totally a team game. This is not a sort of top-down decision-making process. I'll get to my job, if you like, where I say we do the book, and then the book sort of ripples through the organization, and months and years later, it's spat out into the world. That's just not how it happens. And I'm sure it's the same for Al. It's very much a product of group enthusiasm, and where necessary, group critical reading, group refinement, group debates over whether the jacket should be red or blue or black or gold, or all those kind of conversations. There is no one view that should prevail in that, and the wider the circle in general, the more likely you are not to screw it up. And I think that's about as much as we can hope for. In terms of the average day, I now have a week that's divided into sort of two parts. So there are meeting days, which is largely, and this is maybe coronavirus related, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, where I sit through a bunch of meetings. And so I do this, and I talk with people, and we have conversations that range from the kind of routine, the oversight of all the books that are going through our division, to the more sort of challenging, we've got books going into the market, where is the publicity going, what's working, what's not working, what can we do to help those authors, to meeting with putative authors, people who've suggested a book idea to us, or their agents have suggested it, and we meet with them, and basically we see if we like them, they see if they like us, and then we'd have to make decisions about how much we like them and where to get the money. Those four types of conversations basically fill up about 3 days of the week, I would say. Also important to say, especially when you're starting out in publishing, for better or worse, there's a lot of after time possibilities. And somebody touched on networking and how important that was. I think Molly talked about it. The good thing about networking in publishing is you get a lot of free drinks. The bad thing is it occupies a lot of your evenings, and it's a very good way to meet a lot of other young people who are interested in furthering their careers, and you'll have some really nice social opportunities, especially if you end up working for a smaller press where maybe there aren't so many people in your immediate office. Going to book events, meeting people who work in bookstores or in media companies, taking authors to media events. It's a great way of sort of pushing out your boundaries and finding out about it. And I totally agree with Al as well. You know, we may not be as good a writer as the people that we publish. We shouldn't be, in a way. But we've got to be good enough that we're offering them a service, and we have to find time in the week to do a bit of that too, and to concentrate at it.
Thank you. Erica, what does your day-to-day look like?
Well, I'll tell you what it was like when I was at a magazine. So I'd go into the office, and oftentimes we'd have a morning meeting where you go over story ideas and assignments, or if you had an assignment, you just started working on it. You started making your calls, scheduling your interviews, and oftentimes we'd work on more than one story at a time. So you had to organize your day where, so if you had a story that was going to be due on Wednesday, and then you have another story due the next week on Tuesday, you have to schedule your day accordingly. So it was busy, but I have to admit, being a journalist it's fun because it's always different. You're talking to someone different all the time. There's a lot of autonomy. You have to be very organized. And you're reporting and you're writing all day, every day. And before I had children, I would do that up to the wee hours in the morning. Sometimes I'd have stories that wouldn't finish till 4 a.m. because sources were in LA or something like that. My life now, I pretty much work for myself. I mean, I stopped working for full-time for a media company so I could write my book. So I spent several years doing interviews and traveling to meet people to gather information for the book. The book is about motherhood, but it isn't about how to take care of your children. It's about how to take care of yourself. So I spent several years interviewing moms across the country and talking to experts about what it's like to be a parent in the 21st century and the kinds of things that they face that they didn't expect to face, like the motherhood penalty, or dealing with toxic friends, dealing with changes in your marriage. So that took up, I sold my book, and with that advance, I kind of used that to finish writing the book and reporting it out. So it's I have kind of like an unusual day now. I'm writing, I'm reporting. I still do a lot of reporting. I write stories. I recently wrote one for WebMD. I have another assignment from them. So I'm a writer and a mom, and I'm kind of trying to juggle everything. So my day's a little kind of weird.
Excellent, thank you. Elizabeth, maybe you could share what a day in your life was, a day in your life as a writer.
Well, I mean, I've always been teaching. So when I was writing, when I was doing stories for people not on staff, I was also teaching. So, and like Erica, my kids are grown now. Sorry, Erica, but I had kids at home, and like Erica, I had both an adolescent and a toddler at the same time. So for me, at that time, and also working on the books, almost always it was nighttime. I would teach, I would do what I needed to do during the day. I would deal with kids. I think the problem with writing with children, this is going to sound terrible, but with children around, is that you can't do it in half an hour increments. You need a block of time. And the only time that I would get that would be at night. So I was often, and I was younger then, I can't do this anymore, but I would start working at 9 o'clock at night, work till 2 in the morning in terms of writing. And now, right, that's not something I would want to do again. And I think, Erica, you don't have to do that as much, right?
No, I do that. There was a period when I was on deadline for chapters where I would go to once everyone was settled and dinner, my husband was home, I'd go to an all-night cafe in Soho and write till 6 in the morning, and then get up, make breakfast, take my kids to school, and then go to sleep. So.
I think for mothers, I think that the nighttime becomes the work time.
Yeah.
I think, and I think I do want to say I teach a class called Reading Motherhood. So this whole issue that Erica is writing about is something that we deal with in the class. It's every other spring at Georgetown, and we're looking at representations of motherhood. that there's a voice out there that says, that's a good mother, that's what you're supposed to do and be. And that voice, if you listen to it, can drive you a little bit crazy. So we're looking at the way motherhood is represented differently. And one of the things, so for the last, we've taught this course for about 6 or 7 years. Pam Fox in the English department, I co-teach it. And Pam has been saying, we have to write a book, we have to write a book. We have to write a book on motherhood. And I'm like, Erica's writing that book. I don't want to write that book. But what we just did with the support of Georgetown, because Georgetown gave us a technical assistant, we have a website, a blog called readingmotherhood.com. And for us right now, we write in much smaller kinds of ways. It's absolutely manageable. And it seems to be like, wait, this is a whole different way of thinking about writing. We also link to articles that we think our people will find interesting about motherhood. But yeah, so my writing life has changed, but I can actually sit down and write something for that blog, which may just be an introduction to a link in an hour and a half, as opposed to the idea of writing a book, which is just chunks and chunks of time. So I had writing nights, not writing days.
We have a couple questions in the chat, but, and then I know that Maddie wants to talk about the Flex program. Before I turn it over, Al, did you have anything that you wanted to add about the day-to-day, your day-to-day?
Thank you. Yeah, just quickly, I wanted to just turn back to your previous question for a minute, that just to say at GU Press, we have interns really in all the functional departments of a publisher that we've talked about. So editorial, marketing, production, even finance. We've had some wonderful business students work with us. And I wanted to say we have one of our current interns, Sienna Brancato, I can see is on the call, and she's in our production department, kind of helping to turn, you know, manuscript pages into the finished book that you see, and doing a wonderful job with it. Yeah, I mean, I think much of what Clive described is very familiar to me. I spend probably, you know, a third of my time kind of wearing the manager hat, doing things like some fun things like mentoring other people, some things like we're doing right now that are not so fun, putting the budget together for, you know, for next year. But probably another third working on existing manuscripts. So working with authors on developing their ideas, talking with colleagues about how best to publish those books. And then probably 1/3, like basically trying to find new projects. So I'm finding Zoom is actually wonderful for that. You're able to get appointments with people that you might not be able to get in the real world. And it's also possible to have quite a few meetings. So part of that is really kind of acquiring books in the sense of talking to people, seeing what they're working on, seeing if it's a good fit for our press. And then part of that is what I would call commissioning books, where you kind of cook up, you as the editor, cook up an idea for a book, explore it with someone that you think would make a wonderful author, and then, you know, they develop a proposal that you work on together. So that's kind of like my week in a nutshell.
Thank you. And just quickly, Clive, maybe you can answer this question. The question is there a specific amount of experience in terms of years sought after before one can land a job in publishing, given the current job market? Are there social network opportunities or groups that I can join if I'm interested in a career in publishing?
I don't think there is a sort of an absolute requirement in terms of years of experience. I do think internships are valuable. And I think they're as valuable to you as they are to us. You know, you'll know more about what you're getting into, and we will have a sense of, you know, what you like. You'll talk about it knowledgeably in a way that it's very hard to imagine from outside. So I recommend that. I also recommend, if you can, there are a couple of trade publications for trade publishing especially, which you can access pretty much for free. There's something called PW Online, and there's something called Publishers Marketplace. And you can see what books are being bought by what publishers. And that's always nice because, you know, if you see a pattern, if you see a certain kind of book turning up at a certain kind of publisher, then the nicest thing in the world as the publisher is to get a note from somebody who says, you just seem to be about to publish 2 books that I really like the sound of. I would like to know how I get to work at some place like that. It's a very warm and inviting letter. I would find it hard not to respond positively to that kind of approach. So just try and find out what is going on. And this is a version of networking that I think we've talked about already. My recommendation is that whatever correspondence you're having with somebody in publishing, whether it's fleeting or whether it's an internship or whether it's an informational interview, always get out with another name. Get that person to recommend you somebody else in publishing. You can ask them straight, who else should I meet? Who else do you think somebody like me should meet given my areas of enthusiasm? Get that name, make that next interview, and then gradually you'll build your own publishing network, and you will hear about the jobs as they come up, and you'll be a little bit smarter than all the other people because you'll hear about it quicker and people will notice that.
Thank you. And then the last question, and then I'm handing things over to you, Maddie. Maybe Erica could answer this question, or any of the panelists. The question is, what's the best way to approach a publisher when you're trying to sell your book or to get representation for your work?
Well, I started with looking for an agent, and what I did was I bought I think it was called the Guide to Literary Agents, whatever year it was, like 2018 or 2017. And in it, they listed all of the agents and what they specialize in. And I think it even had the books they most recently published in that like area of that area of focus. And so I made a list of who to reach out to with my proposal. And I wrote a letter specifically to each agent. I didn't use like a stock letter or just some, I didn't just change the name out on top. I try to reference books that they have, or authors that they worked with that were similar to the kind of work I did, or something that I really love that they did that I wanted to kind of be in league with. And I just kept sending those letters till I got some yeses. And then from there, the agent helped me pitch to publishing houses. But it didn't just go from, okay, now I'm your agent, let's just pitch this to the publishing house. They worked with me on tightening up my my pitch, my proposal, so that it was ready for these publishing houses. So it really is a collaborative effort. You really have, when you find an agent, it's not just, it's great if you can vibe with them, if you like them, you can talk to them. And we had lots of conversations with my agent. We would laugh and we'd talk about current events and then the book and things that were going on in the world. It's an important relationship in your life because they're helping you make money and build your career. And so it's an important relationship to have. So if you can find an agent that you like, that can help you continue on with your career, that would be great.
Thank you.
I would just say really quickly, it's an agent story. I agree with Erica. So the first book I did with a former colleague from Georgetown. So we're both from Georgetown. We had this idea, poetry as literary therapy. I'll do this very quickly. So we had actually put together a proposal and we had sent it off to agents. Probably we were not as careful as you were, Erica. We're like, what? Who wants to do this book? Who's interested in reading a one-page guide to every poem in the book? It's the worst idea we've ever heard. But there was a young man in DC Andy Carroll, who does war letters now, and he's done this incredible job of collecting war letters. But he had convinced Volkswagen to put a poetry anthology about traveling in every single car they sold. So we thought, we'll go to Andy. He understands. We don't know him. So we wrote to him and he said, no, I don't see anybody. That sounds like a great idea. Leave me alone. And my co-author, who was younger, and she was convinced that he would understand, knocked on the door of his apartment with a manila envelope with her proposal in it, put it under his door. And 2 days later, he called and said, it's on the back of the book. This is the best poetry anthology I've ever read. I'm calling my agent. And Miriam in New York was his agent, and she then represented us. So I'm not saying bang down people's doors, but I am saying it can take some aggression. I mean, we wanted that book out there. So that worked. But Erica's way is probably better.
You know,
I have a lot of no's in the process, but, you know, and don't let the no's discourage you. Just keep going, because someone will see your vision and love your work.
That's right.
I think somebody talked earlier on about being willing to step outside your bubble when you're getting going as a writer. And one of the ways that you can do that is to imagine your book sitting next to some other book on a shelf, a related book, not the same book, but something that you feel is a friendly neighbor to your book. And then ask yourself, who's that author, and how did that book get onto that shelf? And if you look at the back, you'll see in the acknowledgements, most writers generously acknowledge their editors and their agents. So there you are. You found the book that you think your book is in the same sort of spirit of, and you found an agent who represented that book. You've got all the ingredients there to write the good letter, because you've found what they do, you found a perfect example of it, and now they should take you because you're the next generation of it. I mean, I think that also, it's not just kind of flattery, although flattery does no harm at all, but it shows that you're willing to look at the business of publishing. You're looking as a writer about how to get on the shelf, and you need to have a bit of that hustle. I'm fully supportive of authors who want to hustle a bit, because they help us do our jobs. And in the end, everybody appreciates it.
So I know I could go hear you talk for another hour, but I know that we're at time. And I know Maddie wanted to give us some concrete information before we end. So I'll pass things over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was wonderful. Just wanted to put some information out there. Al already started getting our train rolling by talking about internships, right? So if we're interested in the work that all these wonderful people are doing and thinking about how do I get my foot in the door, both Al and Clive have internship opportunities that are available if you want to look into it. And we also have the Georgetown Virtual Immersions and Experiential Work, which is also known as the VIEW program. This came out last summer as a way to help our students who had lost internship experiences due to COVID. So what this pretty much is 2 to 8 week projects with alumni or friends of Georgetown. And a lot of these projects last year ended up being with authors, being in writing, being in editing. There was lots of grant writing. So again, just lots of experiences to kind of get down to the nitty gritty and gain some hard-earned skills in this writing, editing, book proposal, maybe kind of space. And I know we talked with Clive about hopefully supporting a VIEW project as well. So there's lots of opportunities out there. Definitely just wanted to throw that out there and also value everybody's time. So Clive or Al, if you guys want to talk a little bit more about your internship opportunities, please jump in. But yeah, go ahead. Okay, cool. Just kidding. All right. But yeah, thank you so much to everyone who joined us. Soika, I don't know if you want to round us out today or if anyone else has any last words.
Thank you so much to all the panelists. Thank you to Maddie Gregory for organizing this. Thank you to Nicoletta Purdue for her vision for the humanities at Georgetown. This was such a blessing, and I hope that you all have a great evening. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.